PoE2 has multiple issues, and no, this is not a video where we are talking about the general direction of PoE2. I actually like it quite a bit, and I'm glad that PoE2 is not PoE1, because, well, if I want a PoE1, I can just continue to play PoE1, because it's not dead, it's still getting the same amount of content. So no, that's not what the video is about. What this video is also not about is me complaining. Yes, I know I will mention a lot of things which has to be changed in my opinion, but that doesn't necessarily mean that I hate the game, that I don't want to play it and this is unplayable. Again, I have 3 characters already leveling up, I have over 30 hours in the game, and I enjoy it, but I also see that there are issues in the future which have to be addressed as quickly as possible. So the first thing I want to talk about is the dodge roll. The dodge roll is one of the new things they added to the game, and I actually quite like it. The problem with the dodge roll is that it doesn't really dodge anything. The only thing it does is it gives you iframes at some weird moments. I haven't fully figured out when the iframes are kicking in, but there is definitely some iframe, I would say, in the middle and a little bit to the end, where even if you were getting hit, you were not getting any damage. And that's cool and all, but unfortunately, this game has a major problem. Enemies die relatively slowly depending on which items you have found and which build you are running. And you will be surrounded by said enemies. And then you have rows after rows of enemies just surrounding you and trying to get a hit in. And you cannot escape. The only thing you can do here is chucking your health potions and trying to use as much AoE as possible to get out of that situation. And if that doesn't happen, well, you are dead. Because again, your dodge roll cannot phase through enemies, it cannot dodge, technically. And I don't like that much. Especially, they have implemented the dodge roll with one goal in mind, that you are not running around with movability abilities, right? In PoE1, everyone had their blink, their flicker strike, and so on and so forth. Like, you had a lot of options where you didn't really need a dodge roll because you had your abilities, but everyone was running them, so they just said, okay, when everyone runs them anyways, that's not what we wanted necessarily. Let's just put in a dodge roll, but the dodge roll is not dodging. So that would be great if we could make some changes there. Maybe making it more like a dodge roll, especially on how often you have to use it. There need to be some improvements to that role in the future. But that is only a small issue. Let's talk about one of the biggest issues this game has right now, and that is character progression. And character progression is manifold when it comes to the issues it has. The first one is the new talent tree. I was delighted to hear that PoE2 has a new talent tree and that they will finally fix some of the issues the first one had, especially because I have always said that PoE1 wasn't necessarily a very complicated game. It had a presentation issue, and it had those weird moments where you were going through a tree and you were thinking, wait, what is this doing here? This makes no sense. Nobody will ever use that, even with the weirdest and wildest builds out there. Why is that here? And I was kind of hoping that they're not doing that again in PoE2. Unfortunately, they do. They do exactly that, where you have those trees where they set themselves. They want to have meaningful decisions which make sense for your character, no matter which build you are going. And they were right about that. For about the first 10 to 15 levels, and then everything is just wild open and everything mixes and matches, and you are just wondering, what is this? You can see it right here in the background with the mercenary, where they are starting very early on to give you the option of using one-handed weapon, melee weapons in general, or dual wielding, and you just don't do that with the mercenary. You don't want to do that because, yes, the mercenary technically could do that, but on how the mercenary plays, how the crossbow works, how the abilities for the crossbow work in general, you never really touch melee. And yes, I know I know you can have a second weapon build and all that, but let's be real here. Most people will not touch that. And even more so, it's just not something you necessarily want to do with a mercenary because your crossbow can also be a melee weapon when you are switching over to being a shotgun, right? That's your close quarter combat weapon, and you don't need melee weapons to fight off enemies which are super close to you. And it's this, there is so much weirdness here, especially because also when you are looking at the outer ring of the talent trees, you realize very quickly, oh, look at that. There's a lot of weird stuff here, which makes you think outside of the box, right? And that makes sense. But I don't understand why you have those outside of a box talents very early on in the trees. I don't think they should be there, and they should come in much later to just give it a better presentation. By the way, speaking about the talent tree, respec. Please make the respec cheaper. That thing costs far too much money. You're spending most of your gold you have to respec. And I know people are like, well, it's a big improvement to the first one because in the first one it was nearly impossible for normal players. Yeah, I get that. But again, this is PoE2 and not PoE1. So if you are offering me to respec and you don't want to spend me money on that, or you want me to have that option, why let me spend that much money on it? Especially because money is untradeable, and this opens up like so many other questions of how to spend gold in the game, where I don't understand why the talent tree has to be so expensive. But let's talk about the biggest part when it comes to character progression, and that is itemization. Well, to be a little bit more precise, the lack thereof, because finding the items you need is pure luck. And you can be really unlucky. I'm lucky that my mercenary has some good items, that my monk has some good items, but my witch is a mixed bag, and my warrior, let's not talk about my warrior. I am grateful if I find a blue item, and normally in PoE that isn't too much of a problem because you can just use the crafting to make an item happen or something which is some way useful to you. But you're also missing a lot of crafting materials, so you cannot do that. So you are now having to just hope that you will find the items you need. And the reality is you will run around with a lot of old items. Bosses do not drop anything meaningful. I have done the Act 1 boss with 3 different characters, and on the first try, I got a blue item and a scroll of wisdom. Thank you very much for that. On the second run, I got a yellow item and 2 blue items. Nice. And on the third run, I got gold. That was it. Gold. You're like, wait, what? I what? What is this? Like it is so demotivating when you are just bashing your head in for minutes and maybe even hours into a boss, depending on your build and yada yada yada, and then you get nothing out of it. This is one of the things that Souls games have done so well. Yes, the Souls game can be really hard, and you can sometimes try for an hour or two to defeat the boss, depending on how underleveled you were and the build you were running, and so on and so forth. But at the end of a boss fight, there would always be an item for some build to be useful. You would get something out of it which would make you a little bit stronger. In PoE, that's not always the case. It's actually kind of insane that some of the sub bosses, right, the additional bosses you can find, have this, they're definitely giving you something permanently, like some skill points, some extra energy, or something like that, right? And then you have the end of an act boss, and if you're lucky, you're getting a scroll of wisdom and a wet handshake. Cool. That's not fun, right? So they definitely have to tune the character progression, and it just doesn't feel all too great. But the good news is everything I've mentioned here so far is fixable. it's numbers which have to be adjusted. Well, besides of the dodge roll that probably needs a little bit more work, but everything else they just have to crank up the numbers. And I hope that will happen very quickly to make this game more enjoyable. And in the end, it's an action RPG, and in the end, it's about the loot. And when you don't feel that meaningful character progression, the meaningful loot, then what are you doing it for then, besides of bragging rights, right? So, with that said, I hope they're fixing it soon. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like. And also, if you're new to the channel, you want to see more PoE2 videos and RP videos in general, I hope you consider to subscribe. With that said, stay safe, and see you next time. Bye bye.